General Vantas Gets Hitched, or The Limits of Bilateral Diplomacy, a Black Powder Romance, by Jumping Jack Flash. Read by Meagerly Sane. Chapter 2. He tried to remember exactly what he'd said. He'd gone off his speech, rambled. Maybe he left out something important. "You'll be a joke. They're sneering at you already." "I know." That was a laugh, God damn him. "So, that's why you can't accept," Karkat finished weakly. "No," John smiled. "That's why I must accept." He got up and moved to sit beside Karkat instead of across from him, wrapped a hand over Karkat's fist where it lay clenched on his knee. Surprisingly large hand, surprisingly cool and dry. "I'm sorry, Karkat. I didn't realize your position was so precarious. Not that I ever planned to refuse, but I thought you'd be safe back in Alternia during the engagement. We'll work out a way for you to stay here until the wedding. We can move up the date. These things can be handled." Karkat stared at him in utter bewildered disbelief. "Are you actually insane?" Not an insult, but a genuine question. "Maybe a little," John chuckled. He patted Karkat's hand once and let go. "The average human on the street knows it won't be a real marriage, not the way they understand marriage, although they'll probably think the Condess thinks it is, because trolls don't do marriage, so obviously they have no clue what it is." He rolled his eyes. "If she believes I bought that bullshit, I really will be insulted." The laugh that fought its way up Karkat's throat was half relief and half incredulity. "I'm surprised you even know that word." "I'm a veteran too, Sergeant, under all this silly gold braid." John's smile was confiding, and it made Karkat's stomach feel oddly warm. It was good to be addressed by the rank he'd earned instead of the one he'd been dressed up in like a trained animal. "We all are, aren't we? Our generation. The Condess doesn't even understand why anyone would want to make peace, because war is glory, but God, aren't we just tired of it? There's a lot of arm-twisting going on behind the scenes. This absurd marriage offer is her clumsy attempt at barbed diplomacy, trying to hand us a package we can't keep, can't drop, and can't give back. But you know, we humans invented this stuff. Diplomacy, I mean. And we're not going to break this treaty, no matter how confusing she finds it. She can insult us all she wants, but she's not getting out of it." Karkat swallowed, as if this new perspective was something he could choke down and digest. "Then you plan to actually marry you?" "Yes." "But I mean, can we even?" "Oh yes, it's been legal for several years now. My father saw this coming even before the armistice, back when no one was talking about alliance but frontline officers. He thought that the Condess would offer a woman for my cousin, but the principle is the same. I suppose the idea is that I'm even less likely to agree than Jade is, given my position, but on a personal level this arrangement is much more agreeable." Karkat finally began to credit the possibility that John really did understand what was going on, that he knew Karkat was an embarrassment to the Empire, the mutant too famous to cull, and how foisting him off on the humans was tantamount to the Condess wiping her imperial ass with the treaty. But for John to accept this poisoned gift, it still seemed mad. He searched John's eyes intently for any sign of mockery. "But we can't mate?" There was a flash of amusement, but it was mild and brief. "No one is expecting us to. My cousin is my heir, and she plans to have a preposterous number of children. The succession is not a problem." "But how is it—" He broke off with a grimace, shoved a hand through his hair, realized, with the giddiness born of stress, that captor wasn't here to stop him, and did it again with both hands, raking his claws over the itchy spots, refused to wonder why that would make John smile at him fondly, as if he were a charming child instead of a lit grenade tossed into the middle of the peace process. "Look," he said at last, "all I know about marriage is that it's sort of like an official announcement of matesprotship. I didn't bother learning much because I didn't expect to live that long. But how can we be matesprots if we don't even pity each other? Are we supposed to pretend?" John tilted his head. "It's nothing like that, Karkat. It's a legal state, not an emotional one. Our feelings are irrelevant. We don't even have to be friends, but I'm relieved we are." "We're not friends," Karkat said weakly. That big, warm grin broke over John's face again. "After a conversation like this, of course we are. Now shall we let our guards back in? I think your Moirail will be glad to know he doesn't have to cart your severed head back home." "He's not—" Karkat's voice gave out entirely. "But he will be, won't he, now that you know he's safe with you?" John stood up, but paused at Karkat's hand on his sleeve. "They honestly think you're stupid," he confessed, her imperious condescension. "The Blue Bloods, they buy the act. They certainly have no idea what a devious son of a bitch you really are, your Majesty." "Why, General Vantas, what a sweet thing to say," John laughed. He clapped his hands to summon their guards. Solix searched Karkat's face as he came in. Karkat spread his hands, trying to convey that he wasn't really sure what was going on now either. "It's going to be all right," he said, somehow. "Just all right," John grinned, slipping back into his upper-class twit persona. "I think it's going to be fun. Do you know, royal couples aren't required to share a bed, but we ought to at least share a room sometimes. Stay up talking, have pillow fights. It'll be just like being children again. Gosh, the whole place will have to shift to an evening schedule, and won't that annoy everyone?" Solix's knees buckled. Karkat actually leapt over a table to catch him. Didn't realize he'd done it until John made a startled noise. He gripped Solix's upper arms to steady him. and after a moment Solix threw appearances to the winds and mirrored the grip. "He's accepting?" Solix said hoarsely. "And moving up the date," Karkat agreed, almost as dazed by the news even though he'd had some minutes to absorb it. "We're staying here." Without letting go of Karkat, Solix turned to the king and bowed his head. "Thank you, your majesty." John glanced at his guard. With no change to the visible part of his face, the guard lifted a curled fist, and he and the king bumped knuckles. The reception dragged on for 2 or 3 more hours, but with John smoothing the way, Solix almost smiling, and his inevitable doom significantly postponed, it was nearly tolerable. John was an expert at navigating these functions, and could not only charm anyone he met, but made Karkat seem charming too. There were moments when Karkat felt charming, which was very strange. Rather than straining to parrot the appropriate memorized lines, he found himself speaking almost naturally, assuming a gruff and humble war hero role that wasn't very far from the truth. John even got Solix to talk a bit, got him acting more like an aide-de-camp than a bodyguard, somehow nudged him into conversations with people who were fascinated by the difference between magic and psionics, and could go on about it all night. All this without dropping the friendly fool act for a moment. "How do you do it?" Karkat murmured to him when they were in one of the periodic lulls John seemed to engineer, as if to let Karkat retrench before the next wave. "How does no one catch you at it?" John laughed happily. "I'm flattered, Karkat, honestly." "Are we on first names now?" Maybe not downstairs. Not until tomorrow. Apologies, General." A mocking half-bow that somehow included Karkat in the joke. "After the engagement's official, we can use soppy pet names twice in every breath, like witless adolescents, if you like." "I never needed to say anything, did I? I'm such an idiot. I embarrassed myself for nothing." "Not for nothing." Though John's smile was as wide as ever, his eyes were serious. "Not that embarrassing either, if it helps. You're a little bit magnificent when you're angry." Before Karkat could rally from that, a brace of glittering gowns drifted into their orbit, and John fell back into character without a hitch. "Really astoundingly good at shouting. Did you know," he turned to the women, "before the Battle of Nine Elms, General Vantas was warming up with a bit of light bellowing, and just as he hit his stride, an imp assassin popped up." He threw his arm up in a ridiculous stabby killer gesture that made the women gasp. "Well, the General just went on shouting, of course. 'Who told you to step out of line, you horrible little man? You're an embarrassment to your unit, your officer, and your mother. Get back in formation this instant!' The poor thing surrendered on the spot." The older of the two women tapped the king on the wrist with her fan in what looked like a ritualized gesture. The younger was looking Karkat up and down in a strangely appraising way. "Did you really?" she said breathlessly. There was a part of Karkat's mind that had begun flailing helplessly as soon as John started telling the story, angry at the inaccuracy, angry at being held up to ridicule, or worse, misaimed admiration, afraid of giving the wrong answer, flubbing his lines. But there was also a part of him that was caught up in John's wake and enjoying the ride, and that part gave a self-deprecating smile and said, "My language was much worse than that, I'm afraid." Right answer. Smiles all round. Even Captor smiled a little, though he rolled his eyes. Fortunately, no one who wasn't used to his eyes could tell he was rolling them. Half an hour later, at the next pause, John's guard finally spoke. "General, how much of that story was true?" His soft, wry voice made the question sound like a statement of fact. "Tell me you legitimately shouted an assassin into surrendering." Karkat cleared his throat, not sure whether to brag or be modest. He settled for being truthful. "It wasn't like I was addressing the troops. I was taking a thieving quartermaster apart for skimming, and the little bastard popped out of a supply wagon with a crossbow. I took the opportunity to wax eloquent. He'd shot his bolt after all. I didn't expect him to freeze in panic." "You're lucky he missed," John put in. "Missed?" Karkat snorted. He patted his left hip. "No, he nailed me right about here. Why do you think I just stood there yelling at him?" The corner of the bodyguard's mouth twitched up for a moment. It looked like approval. Too soon to assume he'd made an ally there, but he hadn't made an enemy, and that was more than he'd expected. He and Solix had been given adjoined suites, both altered to suit troll tastes. Thick draperies on the tall windows, Recuperacoons standing like awkward guests in corners that had clearly held other furniture until recently. Carpets moved to leave a cleanable path between Recuperacoon and ablution area. The soaper was a bit stale. Someone clearly hadn't known how to ship it properly, but they'd both made do with far worse on many occasions. The beds hadn't been removed. Much too big. Karkat sat on his as if it were a bench, looked down at his tight lacquered boots, and sighed heavily. "Would it be obnoxious to call a servant to get these fucking torture devices off what's left of my feet? I don't think I can do it myself." Solix didn't answer. He stood just out of arm's reach, looking at nothing in particular, looking at anything that wasn't Karkat. No point pretending there wasn't something hanging between them unsaid then. "I know I've put you through some bad shit," Karkat tried, "but I'm queasy drunk and falling down tired, Captor. I'm nothing but a holding facility for champagne right now. Just don't. Meaning, don't blame me for the situation. Don't make me talk about it when my guard is down." "I suppose you think it was worse for you," Solix said. For a moment, Karkat was tempted to pretend he meant the wine, but he knew better. Solix was going to make him talk about it. Shit, he muttered. No, I know it wasn't. Solix's fists clenched and unclenched. The corners of his jaw bunched as if he was making a supreme effort to swallow his words. Then he whirled on Karkat and let them out in an angry torrent. It would have been over for you. I would have been riding that wave of bullshit for years. Or else I wouldn't, which would be a fucking disaster. Did you think of that? What I was going to do without you to hassle me out of giving up? Who's left that gives me even a fractional fuck whether I live or die besides you? Anything I say to Feferi now has to be encrypted to hell and back, and I don't know if maybe you forgot this or something, but Aradia is fucking dead. You're all I have, you dumb grub fucker. The least you could do is make a token attempt to stay alive. Karkat winced. I never thought there was the slightest chance he'd accept. Did you honestly? I hoped. Solix stalked to the nearest chair and threw himself into it. There's planning for the worst, and then there's being a quitter, you raging sack of assholes. How many times do I have to tell you I know doom from long odds before you believe me? You never listen to me, and I can't make you. I don't have the right. Karkat opened his mouth to argue, but shut it without speaking. He couldn't think of anything to say. The room was spinning, and he still hadn't quite adjusted to the prospect of surviving, and the pain behind Solix's scowl was crumpling his heart like a fistful of paper. He got up, unsteady in his too tight boots, stomach sour with alcohol, and sank down cross-legged on the floor beside Solix. He leaned to rest his forehead on Solix's knee. I'm sorry, he murmured. You do have the right. You do now, if you want it. There was a tense pause. Then Solix's hand settled into his hair, ruffling lightly, a thumb rubbing gently along the inner curve of a horn. Solix said softly. I'm still here. Karkat took hold of Solix's trouser leg just below the knee, closed his stinging eyes, and let his mind go blank. All those romances he used to read, the way he used to linger over the pale confession scenes, reread them until the corners of the pages were grubby, until the book would fall open to the most maudlin conciliatory embrace if dropped. Here at last was his chance to live his own love scene, and he was just too tired and woozy and emotionally wrung to say a word. He couldn't even say, Solix, do you know how long I've pitied you? Tell me, because I don't know myself. He couldn't even say, God, my feet fucking hurt. But Solix's hand said what needed saying, didn't it? It was there in the tender, gentle curl of claws. The difference between doom and long odds. The exhaustion of a battle won but the war yet to fight. They both knew that feeling well enough.